All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Strategic News Service member happy hour. We are really excited to be here today with a special guest, a really incredible woman that Evan and I met at the Aspen Ideas Festival last week. I will introduce her more thoroughly in a moment. But first, we're going to kick off with just a little quick dispatch from Evan about trends from the festival, global trends that we kind of observed and are seeing play out in that space. So Ev?
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see all your faces. I think I know everybody in here, so glad to see you again. And it's just, I think we're going to run this as a very quick, we want to get to Olya and spend more time on her than on me. But just to kind of set the stage, we met her at a pretty good event last week at Aspen Ideas. And I thought that there were kind of three interesting things. You can read more in detail in the latest GR, which should be in your inboxes by now. But there were kind of three interesting things that I saw as emerging patterns, particularly across panels. So I was thinking throughout the week of, what are the big patterns that are kind of coming out that we haven't seen as much of before, that we're seeing from a lot of different top experts in their fields. So your three patterns that I saw are as follows. One, I was very inspired and excited to see that the conversation about climate change, even, one at a conference that can be, very liberal conference, et cetera, is very different than it used to be. So that was a really noticeable difference compared to many conferences I've been to many times in history that I've heard people talk about climate change. Two examples really quickly. Frank Luntz, who's a very long-time strategist on the Republican side, doing all sorts of messaging work, is actually was speaking at the conference and is actually extremely focused on kind of undoing some earlier work that used messaging to draw doubt about the severity of the crisis, and gave a very interesting talk about words we should use. You can see all that in the GR, but I think that was an interesting moment really for all of us to have someone who had worked on kind of, toning down the climate messaging back in the early 2000s come back in the exact opposite direction and talk about exactly how we should be talking about it in order to get people more active in fighting climate change. That was like a whole 180-degree turn. I think that's sort of indicative of what's happening right now. I think one of the points he made is that conversation is over. No one's arguing anymore. And he used to argue for the other side. So that was really fascinating. I'd encourage you to watch the footage from that. And then Speed and Scale, folks, if anybody hasn't heard of the book Speed and Scale, John Durr was there. He's at Kleiner Perkins. And so to watch someone who's deep in the finance world and the venture world talk really, really in depth about direct kind of like loading bars for where we need to get, how fast we need to get there. His speed is quite fast. So he's worried about 3 degrees Celsius and how quickly we're going to get there. He's talking about getting things done by 2030. So that was really interesting. And Hal Harvey was there as well on that panel. He's been doing a lot of work for a long time in kind of policy areas. And even Hal was talking about diving in and, pressuring local utilities to go renewable and how you would do that in more of a guerrilla way. So I saw a lot of kind of action there, or focus on action rather than more talk and more COP meetings, et cetera. I thought that was really encouraging. The second one was, I think in the realm of defending democracy, people are much more activated than they used to be. Olya can tell us a lot about a really important version of that, which is the war in Ukraine. But U.S. domestic folks, we're talking about a lot more about things we can directly do to prevent further polarization, things we can do across the aisle, things that are bipartisan. So there's more about that in the GR. And then, abroad, there's a huge upwelling of support that I think actually has sustained longer than one would normally hope based on people's attention spans in the modern era for Ukraine. And so we had some really great folks speak from Ukraine. We met some great folks from Ukraine. But I was encouraged to see that there's kind of a strong ongoing tone of support. And I think that people really do understand and increasingly understand that this is a fight for democracy, not just a fight for, Donetsk or some small piece that Vladimir Putin may want to chop off yet again from Ukrainian territory. I think there was a strong understanding at that meeting and in other places I've seen that we're in a much bigger fight, and therefore there are much more resources required to have that fight. And there's a much larger imperative to win. The same, I think, is beginning to be true of the way that people discuss Taiwan. So I'll leave you with that because we don't want to use too much time. And then the last theme that I think is really interesting domestically in the US but also abroad, is economic development and the way it's being discussed is a lot less boring than it used to be. So we did have Mitch Landrieu talking about the new infrastructure bill, but even some of the things they're doing with that bill money is kind of interesting. I don't want to use too much time on any of these individual things. Hal Harvey was talking about wind farms, the need for pre-zoning and things like that, that again, we're very active in how we can roll out renewables very quickly and not kind of slow ourselves down as we move forward. Pat Gelsinger from Intel was there talking about chip fabs being built in the States and the need to be much more expedient about kind of putting money, R&D money, US government money behind chip fabs. I think there's a strong upwelling of that. And then Eric Schmidt was talking about bioeconomics, same kind of deal. He was talking a lot about the capacity that lots of rural farming areas, and that can be true outside of the US as well as inside of the US, now have to be making new materials that are biologically grown. So, plastics and cements that are both carbon neutral and biologically grown are increasingly possible. And all of these things, I thought the main theme there was that all these people were talking about doing this in places you would not have normally thought of, including, chip fabs in Ohio, all this bioeconomic stuff. The key places to do that are near farming zones, right? And so I thought that was very bullish for kind of Rust Belt farming areas in both the US and abroad. If you have an agricultural economy, there's definitely a lot of promise in some of these bioeconomic new emerging industries and new materials industries that I think are really exciting if you think about the fact that inequality also helps to foster more polarization in politics. So with that, I will leave you. I don't want to take any more time and bear it back to you.
Thanks, Ed. So it is my great delight to introduce you all to Olya Kudinenko, who is the founder and chair of, I'm going to butcher this, but it's Tabletochki. Is that right?
Yeah, Tabletochki, yeah. Kids of Ukraine, American Chamber. So
this is Ukraine's largest charity focused on children with cancer. She founded it when she was only 23 years old, which is a pretty big deal. And since then, she has significantly changed the NGO sector in Ukraine in the field of pediatric oncology in Ukraine, improving the quality of treatment for over 60,000 children with cancer and other catastrophic diseases. She also has been responsible, together with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, for coordinating the evacuation of over 900 kids and their families to clinics in the US, Canada, and Europe since the invasion of Ukraine. That does not account for all of the children that need to be evacuated. There are still thousands that left behind at the moment. And she is currently working on a long-term project to rebuild a healthcare system devastated by the invasion. So the World Health Organization has confirmed more than 100 attacks on healthcare facilities and hospitals. And she's looking ahead to see how that we can restore the most affected infrastructure and reinstitute a thriving healthcare system for Ukraine's families. She is a graduate of the prestigious The Fortune, the US Department of State's Global Women's Mentoring Partnership, and she received the C4F Davos Relations of the Future Award, represented Ukraine at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, and has been named Forbes 30 Under 30 Ukraine, as well as Envy Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in Ukraine and Focus Magazine's 100 Most Powerful Women in Ukraine. So I think it's fair to say she is doing things and making moves. We are delighted to have her here with us today to share a little bit more with all of you about her work and what's going on the ground in Ukraine currently and ways that we can think about contributing to those efforts. So Olya, it's so fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. This is an honor to speak about Ukraine and Ukrainian cause, and especially about children. So I would like to use my voice as a Ukrainian and for Ukrainian kids. Thank you.
I will also add that she and her daughter Vera are just moving to New York so that they can continue to run this organization, or she can continue to run the organization, without being in the middle of a conflict zone. And so if there's anyone in this community that has connections in New York City that would be interested in connecting Olya with folks that might be able to help or support her in that move, I'm sure I know that she would welcome it. So first question for you, how has healthcare in Ukraine been affected by the war? Tell us a little bit more about what's going on the ground there.
Yeah, sure. So when the war has started, nobody knows what's going to happen. And the first, actually, lots of Ukrainians heard that the war will start, but everyone thought that it will be on the east part of the country, so that it would be invaded harder, or more people would be involved there, but not all over Ukraine. But when the war has started, we found out that Russians precisely aim to hit our civil infrastructure. For example, in Kyiv region, we had a hospital which was built by our community, by Ukrainians. They fundraised for it, they built it. It was a pretty nice, not a big, but rather small hospital, but a new one, which was a center for vaccination from COVID and from, first the diagnostics. Then we saw on the pictures from drones that they sent the first missile to the hospital. They didn't hit the hospital. They sent the second missile exactly on the hospital. And they did it 4 times till the time when they destroyed absolutely the hospital. So right now it's absolutely ruined. So much money, efforts, people, resources, which was invested on the hospital are destroyed right now. What we're seeing that they're trying to hit as much hospitals and schools and residential buildings as they can. I believe you all read an article about how they hit a shopping mall. They're doing in Kremenchuk, and they're doing the same with the hospitals. Right now, more than 200 hospitals have been damaged, some of them absolutely ruined. And it's really hard to deliver drugs and pills all over Ukraine because infrastructure and roads have been damaged a lot. So I believe when the war will be finished, we will lose approximately from 300 to 400 hospitals that we had. At some point, it's not really bad thing because Ukraine had this crazy Soviet heritage. I believe you don't know, but in Soviet Union, it was common to build a hospital in every city. And it's not logical, it's not money-wise, because in some cities you don't have lots of population, and it's really expensive to sustain a hospital with a modern equipment, with access to the pills, and especially with doctors who can treat and cure people. So at some point we have to rethink deeply, Ukrainians have to rethink deeply how to revitalize and build back better hospital system in Ukraine. Not just rebuild all hospitals, it's not needed, but to think deeply how we can build hospitals that will last for 30, 40 years for people.
And so what has been your role in kind of shaping that conversation, or, how are you, and like, who's kind of talking about this, and how do you think about, preparing for that when you don't really know yet what the total toll will be?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, we have to create prerequisites. When government and charities and NGOs and international organizations will start rebuilding and building back better any infrastructure. So we have to create prerequisites. I don't believe, as many Ukrainians, and I think you don't believe this, you don't believe too, that war will be finished in one day. It will take time. It will. I mean, we won't have this day. Today the war has been finished. I don't believe in this. So we have to think properly about prerequisites. Second part, I'll tell you a story about children cancer hospitals. We have 24 oncological children's hospitals all over Ukraine. For population of our country, it's too many. And this is impossible to sustain them with modern equipment, with doctors who are capable to treat for such population. This is just not reasonable. So I think that organizations like World Bank, WHO, Ukrainian government, and organizations, NGOs who are working on the ground, like mine, we have to start conversation all together. From our side, we already started conversation with WHO, because WHO announced that their goal to reduce survival rate for kids with cancer worldwide. And to make it at least 60% of survival rate. And Ukraine was elected as one of the focus priority countries, one of the two. So they definitely had a budget for that. They definitely had people who were signed to work on the project. And we have to think properly together what we can do right now. I've been working on creating a hospital for kids with cancer in Ukraine for the last 2 years. We were just about to start capital campaign for hospital in Ukraine, and we even received first commitment gift for $20 million out of 65. But unfortunately, it was on 15th of February from Ukrainian company, which is no longer available.
Oh my God.
So, yeah. So I have seen how my dream dropped down. So I think that we have to start, and we already started, to work properly on this right now, because when the war will be finished, as examples of countries like Bosnia, they shows us that when the war has finished, you don't have time for proper thinking and for proper preparation. You have to act like immediately, because we have to bring back women, kids, and they won't come back if they don't have places where they could be treated or where they could get education. So we have to think about this right now and attract as much as possible support for development aid. Ukraine is a specific country, and it's hard to understand for people who are living abroad. I mean, specific in terms that we don't need diapers, we don't need water, we don't need bread, we need specific help. And those money that had been fundraised for Ukraine, we cannot use them right now. I mean, everybody sends us diapers, we don't need so many of them. We need less, but we need, proper help. So we would like to use that money for good.
So, okay, say a little bit more about what that proper help looks like. You don't need diapers.
Sure.
Got that. No bread. What do you need right now?
Okay, except of guns and defense and military support that we need like specific drugs, for example, for adults who has oncology, or we need modern equipment, medical equipment like VAC, which is called wax, that helps people to stop the bleeding.
Right. So kind of like battlefield medical equipment that will be immediately useful.
Exactly. Or oncological drugs for adults. So that's for sure that we need. And it cannot be donated usually, and it should be delivered in time with a proper time of usage.
So I've already gotten one message from someone that wants to help introduce you to philanthropists and impact investors in New York City. So when we're done with this conversation, I'm going to ask you to put your email and contact information in the chat so that anyone who wants to reach out to you or has connections that can do that.
Yeah.
And I want to, one of the things that you really embody, but I think is true of so many Ukrainians clearly, is this sense of just incredible spirit, right? So if your country is still being bombed and you're planning for rebuilding and how to move everything back in there, and that I think is a very Ukrainian. It is the aspect of Ukrainian culture that has really touched, I think, a lot of the world and really motivated a lot of the world to want to get behind you. You guys do not give up. Right?
Sure, no.
And I'm wondering, one of the things that you personally did was to help evacuate all of these children, 900 of them to be specific, from Ukraine out. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what that was like. At what point did you decide to do that? What was the process like getting them out?
Oh, sure. So on 24th of February, I was on family vacation in Thailand with my daughter. It was a school holidays. And at 10 a.m. I texted to my ex-husband, announcing him that I'm gonna pay for the next work in repairment in my apartment. And he answered me, "The war has started." And I thought, oh, it's 5 a.m. He might be drunk. That was my first reaction. And then I started to check the news and I see that the war has started. So I started to chat to send messages to group chat of my colleagues who are like directors of the foundation and ask them if they heard some missiles and bombs and, you know, they heard some strange sounds. They confirmed that they did. And we started to call our CEO, because I'm not the CEO, I'm founder and board of chair. And he didn't pick up. And we thought, oh my God, maybe something happened to his house, to him. But the first reaction was to pay salaries ahead to all employees. So we called the accountant and I said, pay salaries right now to everyone, because nobody knows how long the bank system will be working. And she answered me, I need to have a proof from CEO. I told her, please do it right now. We will find the proof later. So, and the second reaction, we started to call all hospitals and ask what they need. And what can I say? Ukrainians are really heroes. I mean, all of them, because they asked to bring, hospitals asked for bread, water, and some basic things because we didn't know how to plan and how everything will happen. We called our partners and asked for bread, and they answered, sure, we will donate you bread, but you have to send a driver to our storage, but it's heavy shootings there. Are you ready for that? And you know what? We found the man who was really in his car, BWM, was driving to the storage under heavy shootings to take bread and brought to the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, but then, you know, the second reaction, I don't remember exactly, it was 24th or 25th, but I think it was 24th. We set up a call with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is the biggest healthcare organization in the US and our partners for 5 years. And we started evacuation process. We were responsible for evacuation process inside Ukraine and collecting stories of sickness of kids. And we sent that to St. Jude, they translated it. And we were bringing all kids into, like, depends on what region they were. First stop might be in Kyiv, and then in Lviv, and then to Poland with those convoys, with the militaries, so the kids would be safe. And at that point, I understood why why I worked hard for the last 10 years, because I have my phone with all the numbers of deputies, of ministers, and I started to call and ask, hey, do you have a bath? The second call to the CEO of gas company. Hey, we need a gas, send us some gas. Because it was like, you know, it was huge lines for gas stations and kids couldn't wait because the road was crazy. It took like 10, 20 hours to get from Kyiv to Lviv, which usually takes 5 hours. And kids were sick, unfortunately. Because of the war, we lost 2 kids on a road. They died during the road. We sent a girl to St. Jude, but because of the war, she lost 1 month in her treatment because it was hard to evacuate her. And we evacuate kids even from occupied territories like Kherson, but we cannot do it like immediately. We have to wait while our people, you know, connections says it's safe to drive. So we were like waiting and trying to evacuate as safe as we could. And also we had so many stories. I mean, like all Ukrainians have stories, but I'll tell you just one, and then I explain why we want to rebuild and why we're so strong. We had a kid and his mom. They were in Chernihiv, which was heavy bombed, and lots of missiles were there. Like 70% of city has been destroyed, and the hospital there in the city center. And it was not safe there at all. And mom decided to go with the kid to go home. She went home, and her kid, he was really sick. It's a boy, and he stopped to eat and drink. He didn't do this for 24 hours. He was basically dying. And she understood, okay, I don't have a choice. I have to do something. And she started chemotherapy by herself at home. I mean, she doesn't have any doctor's education. She's not a doctor. She's not a medical professional. So she just had to act. And this is Ukrainians in this position. Of course, we all wanted to wait for better circumstances, We want to wait while we will have a peace in our country, while we have, I don't know, much money, and lots of investments, and I don't know, better government, whatever. But we don't have a choice. And you know, I'm thinking about how to build my country back, because I lived there for 34 years.
Yeah.
I had a reputation there. I had a mission of my life there. I have resources, my beautiful apartment, not like New York shoebox, beautiful apartment. I want to live there, but if I want to live there, I need to have a place where my daughter will live.
Right.
So I have to think, and I mean, if you compare Ukraine to countries like Afghanistan or Syria, we don't have refugee camps. All Ukrainians trying to assimilate, try to find work, try to provide for themselves. So we are hard workers. Literally, we are hard workers, and we want just to live free, happy life in our country. I never had an idea to immigrate anywhere. So I even don't want to call myself refugee, temporary displaced person.
All right. Well, we will make sure that we call you a temporarily displaced person. You certainly have the spirit of a temporarily displaced person, and so we're gonna start. We're gonna switch over to Q&A. So if you have questions, just raise your hand in the Zoom thing, and I'll call on you so as to avoid total mayhem. But I'm gonna ask you one last question before we do that, Olya, which is, if you still have these thousands of kids in Ukraine that need to get out. And you talked about what Ukraine most needs from a military perspective, but I'm curious if you can give us an update on, from what you know from your sources in Ukraine, where are the most kind of important military battlegrounds at the moment, and how can we help? It's a two-part question, which are not related, but how can we help with the evacuation of other children needing treatment?
Okay, the war, the spin attention from the war has been down, just because it's heavy fights, and on heavy fights it usually sometimes you move a little bit forward, then you're stepping back, and it will take some time while we push those crazy Russians away from our territories. But Kharkiv bombed every day, literally. Kharkiv attacked every day, and the east of the country, like Lysychansk. I mean, I don't feel comfortable to name all the names because it's hard to hear them. But in the Donetsk region, the Donetsk and Lugansk region are the heaviest wars, heaviest fights every day. How to help kids and why we don't evacuate them all? First of all, some parents don't want to leave them to leave the country, because some women want to stay with their husbands. For example, we had a story, just a short one. A boy who has cancer, he's 17 years old. They are from Donetsk region, and his mom is a nurse. When the war started, he asked his mom, "Will you stop cure me because of the war, and you are going to go to help others on the battlefield?" So kids are thinking the parents.
It's amazing. Like, what basically, like, you should stop taking care of me so you can help more people.
Yes. So some families that don't want to leave the country, and some of the kids won't make the road. So we need help with the money. This is like, I know that all charities and NGOs asking for money, but this is what they can use in a most effective way. Sometimes we need to pay for extra visit from the doctors or for pills that like we need right now, immediately. And if I ask, for example, for some certain pill, it will take weeks to get it.
Right. Right. So it's better to have the financial resources on hand to be able to
in the country. Sure.
Needed. Okay. Well, I think we have some good potential connections for you already to help, that may be able to help on the money front. And I want to start taking a couple of questions. I see one from John Anderson. John, you want to go first?